But right now, very pleased to have with us the author of the new book, Founding Rivals, Madison versus Monroe, the Bill of Rights and the Election That Saved a Nation. Chris DeRose is with us. Chris, good evening, sir.
Hey, good evening. Glad to be here.
Well, happy Bill of Rights Day to you.
And to you.
Now, your book actually gets into the story of how the first 10 amendments came to be, right?
Absolutely. You know, we owe our Bill of Rights to one election for Congress back in 1789 in Virginia's 5th Congressional District, fought by two future presidents, James Madison and James Monroe. And because of that election, decided by 336 votes, James Madison was able to go to the first Congress where he was the only person who could have passed the Bill of Rights. So literally, our Bill of Rights, these fundamental liberties that we cherish and hold dear and celebrate today, are all because of one election told for the first time in my book, Founding Rivals.
You know, I have never seen an entire book about this. I've seen a passage in other books that mention this congressional race, and I'm guessing at this point, I mean, 1789, you said, right?
1789.
So this was really, I guess, the anti-federalists and the federalists had. This was an evolving process at that point, then, right?
Absolutely. You know, James Madison was the leader of the Federalists. He believed that the Constitution had enumerated powers. And so just for example, if the government had no right to regulate firearms, why do we need a Second Amendment to protect the right to bear arms? James Monroe said, it's not quite that simple. And, you know, James Monroe was an anti-federalist, and he was speaking for most anti-federalists when he said, the national government will infringe on those rights that we don't specifically protect. And so he was of the belief that these rights need to be spelled out in a Bill of Rights. And he wasn't alone. In fact, when George Washington took the oath of office, the states of North Carolina and Rhode Island were outside the Union. They said, we can't get on board with the new constitutional government until there's a Bill of Rights. And so Madison, he wins the election, but he realizes in the course of this election that there is a significant part of the country that will never be reconciled to the Constitution unless and until that Bill of Rights gets passed. And so he becomes the unlikely champion of the Bill of Rights and convinces his Federalist cohorts to go along with it.
You know, this is one of the things that I love about history, the things that we take for granted, and in fact, some of the things that we revere in this country did not come about because of unanimity. They didn't come about because, all America supported this. These were tough fights, even at the time to get this. And as you mentioned, I mean, in this election, what, 334 votes was the separated the two candidates?
336, yeah,
Wow.
very narrow margin of victory. And, you know, one of James Madison's campaign managers told him, if this race had happened a day earlier, I think you would have lost.
Really?
Yeah, he started out pretty far behind. You know, we're talking a lot about redistricting all through the country. And James Madison was actually the first victim of gerrymandering. The anti-federalists controlled the Virginia legislature, so they drew a district that was 3-1 anti-federal. And he was designed to lose that district. And he started out very far behind. And only by embracing this idea of a Bill of Rights did he catch up to Monroe and win the election.
Oh, wow. Now, was a Bill of Rights an important issue in this race?
It was. And what Madison came out in favor of a Bill of Rights in a letter to a gentleman named George Eve. George Eve was the leader of the Baptists in the district. And the Baptists had been persecuted by the government of Virginia. They were very concerned about this new government under the Constitution. And so Madison first makes the promise to him that he will seek a Bill of Rights if elected. So Madison neutralizes that issue that had been used against him throughout the campaign and is able to blur the distinctions between him and James Monroe. And so he's able to win.
That is so fascinating. Now, as you say, again, we're talking about two future presidents. Monroe's background was as a Continental soldier, right? I mean, he served under George Washington, right? As a matter of fact, the famous painting of Washington crossing the Delaware, James Monroe is actually in that picture, right?
That's right. It's right. James Monroe was with Washington at some of the most exciting theaters of the war. He's there in New York when they're driven out of New York at the beginning of the Revolutionary War. They're driven across Pennsylvania. He winters with Washington at Valley Forge. He is part of the vanguard in the Battle of Trenton and plays a very important role in stopping the Hessian soldiers who were fighting for the British from putting up cannon on the main road into town. And he's able to lead troops down that road into the city of Trenton, and it was critical in winning that battle. And that battle really held the balance of the war at that point.
So this was a campaign or a race between a legitimate Revolutionary War hero and one of the leaders of the Constitutional Convention. I mean, what was Madison's reputation at the time of this election?
He had an excellent reputation, even among many of his opponents, for just being an incredibly. They were both very high-caliber individuals, both very virtuous and honest people. Madison was really renowned for his intellect. You know, Jefferson called him the first member of every body in which he ever served. And so he was just an incredibly intelligent person, very persuasive, had an incredible command of facts and of history, philosophy, science. And so he would put forward the most persuasive arguments that people had ever heard. And so Madison and Monroe both have terrific reputations. I mean, really, no voters of any congressional district have ever had a better choice than the voters in the 5th in 1789.
No, I was going to say. I mean, you think about the the choice in that race. Boy, those folks were spoiled back then, weren't they?
Yeah, we'll never, ever see the likes of a congressional race like that ever again.
Now you say that Madison was the only guy who could have shepherded a Bill of Rights through Congress, even though Monroe also supported a Bill of Rights. Why was Madison so important to the issue?
So the easiest way for us to think about it is it is a Nixon to China moment. Only Nixon, as a strong anti-communist, could have gone to China and opened up that country to the West. Similarly, only James Madison is the leader of the Federalist Party, this party that completely thought the Bill of Rights was unnecessary, dangerous, premature. The Federalists had huge majorities in the first Congress. There were only a few anti-Federalists. And so James Monroe would have been a very lonely voice pushing for these Bill of Rights. But Madison, as the leader of the party opposite, was able to drag the Federalists along and persuade them into supporting a Bill of Rights in the very first Congress. So only Madison, as the leader of the Federalist Party, by embracing the opposition's signature issue, could have gotten it passed.
Absolutely fascinating. What kind of research did you do into this book, Chris? Were you able to look over? I mean, did they have campaign materials? I can't imagine, they're handing out flyers, and obviously there weren't any robocalls back then. But
thank goodness.
Were you able to look at any of the campaign literature from either Monroe or Madison?
Absolutely. In fact, I looked at letters written in their hand that were written to voters in the district, explaining where they stood on the issues, addressing those voters' concerns. There were newspaper essays, one after the other, with people extolling the virtues of one candidate or talking about the problems of the other candidate. It's one of these enduring myths of American history that every successive election is more negative than the one before. Mm-hmm. In fact, we've had negative campaigning from the very first election, as I show in Founding Rivals. So, which we were looking at letters that they wrote in support of their candidacies. We have some evidence on what they set out on the stump, and we know what was written in the newspapers in essay form. So those are the most important means of conveying their sentiments to voters.
That is absolutely fascinating. Chris, the book is out now?
It's out now. It's available on Amazon.com. It's available on FoundingRivalsBook.com and anywhere where books are sold.
Well, listen, I'm really pleased you could join us on the program. I'm going to be picking this up. I'm taking a week of vacation next week, and this is in my my material that I want to read while I'm actually have a few hours. It looks like a fascinating book, a fascinating chapter in American history. And, Chris, thanks so much for joining us tonight, sir.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And when you're finished, I'd love to come back on and chat with you about it.
Absolutely. Love to do it. Chris DeRose, author of Founding Rivals, Madison versus Monroe, the Bill of Rights, and the Election That Saved a Nation.